Okay, welcome again, the second time, to the Read Write Book Club um, here on Accidental Origin. Everything's going great so far,
Yeah.
totally smooth. It's good and fine. Um, so I am your host, Sam, aka MC Pepper Pockets. With me today is Brendan, my co-host,
What's up, guys? And
and
we do
and
this
our
every
guest,
time.
and our guest. I'll take it. Our guest, Rob.
We've updated the photo to include the new cat he picked up.
Yeah, his stray cat friend.
Very friendly. Only had him one day. Well worth.
Yep. Okay. And of course, Rob is the one who recommended the book that we're going to be talking about today, the second half of Sapiens, which is basically a brief history of all of human history.
Yep. It's been a pretty fascinating read. So far. I will say that I find the second half less satisfying, but more intellectually interesting, or more relevantly interesting.
What in particular did you think
So,
was like more relevant?
uh, the chapter on capitalism right now is
Oh yeah.
very relevant to me, specifically when he was talking about the sort of idea of an ideal capitalist, where they were like, yeah, an ideal capitalist is someone who's using their excess cash in order to reinvest into production, and I'm like, that's like everything I'm doing as a writer right now. Where it's like I'm using my job to reinvest money into freelancers to create products using my work in order to sell them to make more money, which then I can reinvest again into more of my own work.
Yeah, it's the idealized cycle, which of course, as he points out a little bit, doesn't really ever happen.
Yeah. And I agree with what Sissel's saying. I feel like the second half is a little less satisfying because it is so much more speculative and a lot less like, here's interesting theories about world history, and more like, why are we like this?
Yeah, I felt like it was really speculative in a way that I didn't think was like appropriate for that, for like known history. It's totally fine to be able to just like, spitball about whatever happened 10,000 years ago before we had writing and barely had language, but like 200 years ago, there's photographs of that. So you can't just go spinning yarns like no one was there.
Right. But he also makes the point about when he's talking, where he's saying, we can 100% describe the how it happened, but we can't describe the why it happened, which is really the questions that he's speculating about.
Earlier on, yes, but like again, once you get up into the 18th and 19th century, people are writing everything down. So a lot of the time, you actually can figure out why things happen because you've got like the diaries of everyone involved, so you can see it from everyone's perspective.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
but
think
that's too small a scale. You can't take the individual and still speculate the masses.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of my problem with it is that he's taking that same big scale examination that he has on the first two thirds and he applies it to like really close up history in a way that I don't think really makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, he speaks of large data as well, which doesn't always apply. Can't really apply statistics to history always.
No, exactly, because all it takes is the right person at the right time and it can change things completely. I don't know. I thought that you're totally right, like that it becomes very more about him musing philosophically on things.
Yeah. I do like I like the very logical approach to his arguments. And that really speaks to me as a very logical person, where he's like, yeah, this makes no sense because they directly contradict to each other, but that's just kind of the way that society works. And all this stuff.
Yeah.
When he's talking about religion specifically, of this sort of idea of Catholicism or modern Catholicism being both monotheistic, dualistic, and polytheistic in the same breath. which is actually really fascinating.
The way it's
I found that a lot happening. I never really picked up on that.
Yeah. Well, in coming from an Irish Catholic family where saints' feast days are kind of an important thing, it's actually even more fascinating. Because, like, I see that stuff. I'm named after Saint Brendan, the Irish traveler. Like, that's a thing. Like, it's very big in Irish Catholicism. So to kind of see that broken down into these arguments is really, really fascinating.
Well,
Do you find yourself religious, and do you find that changed your opinion?
I would not consider myself religious. I would say that I'm likely agnostic, because the world is a strange place. But I don't think this necessarily changed my view of it. Though it is fascinating to see, because I knew a lot of it. Like when we're in the first couple of days of October, right? And October 31st being Halloween, right? But like All Hallows Eve and All Saints Day and all that stuff, right, is a very religious / pagan / all these commercial celebration, right? It's kind of a melding of all these different traditions all in the same day, 2 days, right?
Well, the author speaks of capitalism as a religion, so it's interesting because it's just another one thrown in the mix.
That part really blew my mind. Not necessarily capitalism per se, but the idea of communism being a religion, of ideologies in general being the exact same thing as religion. And I was reading that part and I was like, oh, he's so right. Goddamn. But it was one of those, like, it took me, I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but it's really, really interesting to think about.
His example of the Marxist-Leninist like historical theory, it really lined up in a pretty hilarious way with, like it's got the final battle and like this preordained destiny and like things you never associate with, or I would never have previously associated with what you'd call like an economic theory, but actually it totally has these mythological components to it. Mm-hmm. This afterlife that we're all going to go to, and it'll be post-scarcity, and nobody will work or whatever.
Yeah. I was also really fascinated about the way he spoke about Nazism in this chapter, as a part of evolutionary humanism, and obviously being completely racist and very much debunked at this point. But it was just an interesting viewpoint where he wasn't like. I liked that he exposed it logically and wasn't just like vehemently opposed to it, just out of spite, where he took the same approach to that as he took to everything else in the book. You know what I mean?
Yeah, as just another weird phenomenon in human culture.
Yeah, he approached it very scientifically. He still points out that their findings and their way of going about it were unscientific, and they were very close-minded themselves, obviously. Yep. It's just funny how they can seek to be the perfect race through science and yet overlook something like that, the actual science behind it and the genetics.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about, as with every, like, magical thinking order, like, it just... which facts do you cherry pick out and use to support what you already believe?
Yeah. The author also states, though, that not one person can change the world single-handedly. That's kind of intriguing when you look at Hitler. I mean, he may not have done it single-handedly, but without his influence, would it have happened the same way? I guess that's kind of a theoretical question.
That's a classic debate about whether there's single individuals who really like guide history, or if there are certain periods of time where history is just kind of ready for people, and whether you get this guy or that guy, someone is going to step in and fill that role.
Yeah. He used the example of Darwin and that other guy whose name I can never remember, but he has 3 names, and I've heard of him talk a bunch, where he was so mad about Darwin stealing his idea.
Oh yeah, no, then that is a wonderful classic because it was within a year, I think, that they published. It was.
I don't even think it was that long, to be honest.
But like, I mean, there's tons of examples. Like Newton invented calculus, and the same guy in Germany invented it like literally within months.
The telephone.
Telephone, yeah,
it was
all over the place,
invented 3 times within like 6 months or something like that.
Even like the internal combustion engine, there was some people in America, in Britain, in France, like everyone, a lot of the time people are working on these things simultaneously. And like on the political side, looking at like Nazi Germany, that kind of thing was going on in Austria, was going on in basically all of the countries that had got torn up previously, that revanchism. So yeah, who knows whether it would have been Hitler or more a Goebbels or one of those other guys who would have taken control of that party, but like there's kind of these tides to history and social movements.
Yes, Alfred Russel Wallace, that's the guy. I always forget his name.
Oh god, yeah, and let's like not even get into Edison's whole his weirdness, all the things he took off Tesla.
So yeah, like, how did we feel about this portion of the book in regards to modern day applications? How do you think that this? Obviously, we aren't quite. I didn't quite get to the last chapter, but we aren't describing quite what we are today, up to the point that I've read. But it's close. Yeah. And you can start to see a lot of the stuff that came out of those things. I did not know that story about the wall being under Wall Street.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's really fascinating.
I thought that was pretty famous. But
I also think it's kind of a really cool irony that it's like the Dutch kind of created that financial system that Wall Street is known for, as well as the literal wall that it's named for. So it's like this whole thing.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a weird dual connection there in that one particular, both space and time.
Yeah.
Actually, that kind of happens in a lot of places when there are big fortifications. They eventually, when the city gets big, and grows past them, they'll knock the wall down. They'll have this weird strip of land, and it's like, well, I guess we'll put a road there. Yeah. Because you can't build buildings on it.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah, so like I don't know, I definitely thought this segment that was more about like not current but like modern history, i.e. everything past the scientific revolution, was a lot less interesting to me than the first half, just because it's like I kind of already know like these events are all pretty current compared to the 100,000 years ago that we've been talking about. So,
definitely.
I thought it was just really weird, like the telescoping of scale, where like you can be talking about thousands of years in one chapter and then like dozens of years in this chapter.
Yeah.
It shows how quickly we advanced or how much information there is to cover, though. I mean, the book would have to be so much longer if you wanted to keep the same amount of information per year, and it would just be impossible at that rate. So you really have to scale it down. But in the same regard, some passages are only a page long, and it really just skims the surface. Like the modern capitalist economy, they only talk about that for about a page and a half. He only talks about it, and then he goes on to talk about the influences, but skips right to the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah. And Sam knows how much I'm fascinated by the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty transformative time. And he goes into an important, like in the whole science and empire segment.
Yeah.
I thought that was really neat. Just because it shows all these things that we kind of take for granted, the way society works now.
Yep.
And like where they came from and why.
Oh, definitely. I love that story about the Dutch. Like, I just really liked the way that he told that story, and like the whole thing about like, yeah, the King of Spain was doing this with like they had the two brothers example. King of Spain screwing everybody over, so no one gave him credit anymore. So like the Dutch started taking over and became the new empire, and then Britain and France basically fought and did the same thing. Like, not too many years later, and they created their own empires. And
and that was particularly interesting because it was one of the examples I thought of him leaving out like a really important factor. Which is not just that the Spanish Empire got like out competed by the newer, smarter like Dutch state, but like Spain had been importing so much gold that they had completely debased their currency. So even though they were wealthy, like it wasn't worth anything anymore. And that's something he leaves out, and that's pretty important in the disintegration of the Spanish Empire.
Right. But he wasn't really talking about the disintegration of the Spanish Empire so much as he was giving a story of the rise of the like stock exchanges and the idea of a credit-based society.
And they did that in response to this currency that was spiraling out of control. So instead of having it being based entirely on how much of this yellow metal you have in your basement, they made it based on like rate of return and interest rates and stuff like that.
Right.
And that's a good point for the entire second half of the book, considering the author really deviates from the analytical for the first portion of history and moves towards more socio-political views. Doesn't really look at economics or anything like that. It's purely socio-political for the last couple of chapters.
Yeah, and I agree with what Stitz was saying, which I think is what Rob was bringing up as well. Like, that's why I said that this half was really interesting to me from an intellectual perspective, because like it's very philosophical, and it's very like, I wonder what would happen if the world was a little bit different. And that really speaks to my writer's brain, because I don't know if this happened to you, Sam, where you're like sitting there and you're like, I wonder if I wrote a science fiction story about a world in which the scientific revolution didn't happen, how would that look? Right? But like that's sort of like, this is what science fiction writers and short stories have done for ages, where they're kind of take that one little what if question, what if society had been this little bit different? And this book raises a lot of those in the second half, and I kind of love that, where I'm sitting there going, this would make an interesting story, and this would make an interesting story.
So you've totally got to read the new Neil Stephenson book then, which is all about going back or using time travel to subtly manipulate the present.
Ooh.
So like getting Crimea back into Ukraine instead of it being annexed by Russia. So they go back and try and influence Imperial Russia to be more eastward instead of westward facing. Right, so it's not as interesting. Anyway, the whole thing is about these
how can
tiny,
you not
subtle...
love Neil Stephenson?
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. What is it called? I have it somewhere. Anyway, it's called Dodo something. Anyway, it's a very good book, and it's all about little weird historical changes. Like early on, they reference the building that holds all of the American military apparatus as the rhombus. Nobody knows what the Pentagon is. That doesn't exist.
The rhombus.
Yeah, so that was one of those hints, like, oh, we're in an alternate timeline. All right.
Nice.
Yeah, and that's he touches on each of the little things that he had reflected on in the earlier parts of this book, where it's like, what if they developed written language earlier or later or whatever, and like, would it really be the same, or would it just be the timescale kind of? Oh yeah, the rise and fall of Dodo. In my head, I want to call it The Life and Times of Dodo, but that's not the title of that book at all. But yeah, those subtle butterfly effect shifts are really like omnipresent in this last part.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that this isn't what this book is about, but I almost wish he explored a little bit more of those what if questions, and it seems like the second book is a lot of that. Homo Deus.
I haven't actually looked at that.
Where I kind of want to know what his theories are. Like, what if this had been a little bit different, or what if this event hadn't happened? Because I'm curious now what he would think.
He talks about it like a little tiny bit in the very last chapter, where like he describes the ape that became God, that we are able to like manipulate chickens and cows to grow in certain ways and in certain places, and we have prosthetics like glasses where we can have mechanical augmentation to our vision or whatever. I think he just kind of goes down that rabbit hole even further in the second book, or in Homo Deus. Available as an audiobook.
Yeah.
So, like, sorry, I just look at my notes here. As a particular example that I thought was interesting of those weird knock-on effects was the curing of scurvy as like just a pet project by one guy, and nobody believed him. And then he did it, and suddenly the British ships could travel like 10 times as far, and have almost no casualty rates from just disease. It's such a subtle thing, just like eat more fruit instead of meat, and your problem is solved.
Yeah, I was kind of fascinated by that whole expedition of like, we're going to do this, and because it's so expensive, we're going to send all these people, and all this stuff happened, and they like literally changed the face of the British Empire in that one voyage. Like, yeah,
it's astonishing how many like just dudes in wooden tubs practically changed the world during that period of time, and how many people you could jam into one of those wooden tubs.
Yeah. So what were you gonna say, Rob?
The ability for that kind of biological or medical advancement nowadays, though, is almost impossible with the entry, the financial entry to it.
Yeah.
The author touches on that a little bit too.
Well, I mean,
how capitalism has helped, but has also created more of a barrier to entry at the same time.
Yeah. But I mean, is that finance's fault, or is that because we require a much higher, more specific set of equipment nowadays because we've advanced so far, where it doesn't cost us the price of oranges to do a scientific experiment?
Well, it was still expensive back then.
Orange was expensive. Yeah, it's more. There's more of a political entrance as well. I mean, there's more segregation, and knowledge is not so widespread. There's a lot of privatization.
Yeah, and you're kind of touching on something that Harari. Didn't quite sneeze. Something that Harari talked about early in the book, which is that these days everyone has a very specific knowledge set, a very narrow expertise.
Yeah.
And that kind of gets narrower and narrower as we know more and more about stuff. So
yeah,
it becomes harder to.
It's the cell phone
find
analogy.
New things. The cell phone that just gets smaller and smaller until it's just
no,
like the thing out of
the analogy being
out of Zoolander.
Out of Zoo. No, I don't think so.
No.
Maybe it is. Maybe I was thinking there's a comedian who does this bit about it. I can't remember the name of it, but the idea of like, this is a cell phone. I could not build one of these. Like, you couldn't build one of these.
Well.
Rob maybe could build one of these. Maybe it'd be a stretch, because he's an engineer and knows more about this kind of thing than I do. But the point is that, to be honest, there isn't really that many people in the world who could build one of these. But there are people who can build specific parts of these. And they kind of all combine to make this one little machine that we use every single day. Like where people like who are doing chip designs and all that kind of stuff couldn't build a computer from scratch, but they can build one specific piece of the chip. And that's what they're responsible for. And that's what they do every single day, is design this one specific piece of the chip.
Yeah, and that's industrialization, or that's specialization of labor.
Yeah,
is having enough excess resources.
To how we've done it, though. No one specializes in microchip manufacturing unless they work for a company that has the equipment.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Now, that's how it happens in our society, where everything is profit motive driven, whereas we don't know what would happen in like a different world where somehow we've always been communist, and so like it's just science for science's sake. Or you don't know that someone wouldn't have just in their crazy garage have created something comparable, if not identical. Like just because the technology exists. Just look at the way the cell phone, the little gyroscopic processors on there have allowed the creation of so many other weird electronics.
Yeah.
Even though they were never intended for that.
Oh yeah.
You know, like some things just kind of explode out whether or not there's someone paying you $10 million. And then some things just would never exist.
So my favorite
story,
my favorite story about technological innovation in that way is actually the story where what Sony did in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, was they gave their engineers a workroom. And in the workroom, they just had tons of electronic parts, and they were like, whenever you have free time, you can just come hang out in this room, build whatever you want. The only caveat is, whatever you build, we own, right? Because they're putting up the upfront costs for all of the materials and all that kind of stuff. And so a bunch of the Sony guys were hanging out in this room and building stuff. And eventually what they built was the first Sony Walkman tape deck.
Yeah.
Right? So like, that's my kind of favorite story about this, where it's like, you can, like, allowing that sort of innovation, right? Allowing humans to kind of think through that stuff, you're going to discover things that aren't necessarily intended to be discovered, but they have the creativity and the freedom to be able to do it.
But that's still manipulation by capitalism.
Oh yeah, totally, because they made so much money on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they claim the rights to it. And there's a lot of instances where people who come up with ideas in this day and age don't have the rights to them.
Yeah, well, intellectual property being what it is, right?
Yeah, well, that's a huge debate that's really...
Yeah.
Go on then.
Well, I was going to say that's just a huge debate that's nowhere even close to being concluded, like either in the public discourse or in the courts or anything like that. Like we're so right in the middle of that struggle right now.
Yep.
And it's hard to say, like, if you come up with an idea, like if you're writing a story, then as soon as you write it down, you kind of automatically own it. But like you can find yourself in a situation like the Sony guys where regardless of whether you came up with it completely out of the blue with no contribution from anyone else, just because you did it on their time or in their space, then they possess it. Like, what are the legal and moral implications of that?
Yeah.
Like, obviously there's no conclusive answer, at least not right now. Maybe in 500 years it'll seem obvious, the way that some things now seem obvious about things in the past.
If the planet's around for 500 years.
Well, yeah, and that's something he talks about at the end as well.
I mean, do you think it's a negative impact on human advancement, or do you think net overall it's actually helping us advance?
The idea of owning intellectual property?
No, the idea of corporations owning it, or the ability for corporations to privatize information. Well, is what currently is the norm.
Yeah, right now it seems to be extremely beneficial because there's so much stuff, so much technology that comes out of that.
So I heard an interesting story not too long ago. I forget where I read it. It was in an article.
You say there's a lot, but you don't think there could be more technology to come out of it, or at a faster rate? Sorry, cut you off.
No, it's okay. But my point is kind of relevant to that question of, I forget which company it was, but basically the company wasn't publishing patents even though they could, because as soon as they published the patents, their technology became public knowledge.
I know Tesla does that.
Yeah, well,
not Tesla, excuse me, SpaceX.
I was thinking that it might actually be about SpaceX that I was reading. Because it wouldn't surprise me, because I read a lot of articles about Elon Musk apparently.
Well, so the argument that I saw made,
considering Tesla makes all of their patents or all of their stuff completely open source. SpaceX tries to hide it. Interesting.
Well, so SpaceX, or the argument that I've seen attributed to SpaceX, is that they don't patent it because they'd be giving the documentation for their new technology to their main competitor, the United States government.
Right.
Which would make no sense from a business perspective.
Right.
That seems like a personal vendetta because I know Elon hates NASA.
Well, it's paranoia for sure.
Does Elon hate NASA or does Elon hate the U.S. government? Because those are not necessarily the same thing.
Well, I mean, they're not the same thing, but they're linked in the sense that what would the U.S. government do with that technology? Probably hand it over to NASA for space technology, as well as the military.
Yeah, it's more the military.
I guess that might be his big fear, but I don't know.
I would think he'd be more worried about the military than NASA getting their hands on it. Because he works with NASA, literally.
It would be that bleed out, like, to the government and then out to the military industrial, like the Raytheon, Boeing guys would get their hands on that, and they are the ones who are mainly competing with him as the United Launch Alliance, the ULA.
Yo, Rob, what kind of engineer are you? Chat wants to know.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to clear that up. I'm not an engineer. I'm just a chemist. I'm not a chemical engineer. I work with them. I'm a chemist.
Oh, I thought you had, well, your degree's in chemical engineering, right?
No.
No.
That is your mistake, Brendan.
Oh.
It is not.
My bad.
All right, everyone, get your diplomas out. You gotta read the fine
I
print here.
specialize in nano, and now I work in biochemistry.
I don't know if it was the same for everyone, but you cut out exactly when you said I specialize in.
I believe it's
And then
nanochemistry, right?
Yeah.
I specialized in nanochemistry in university, and now I work in biochemistry.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Very relevant to this.
My-
Extremely relevant.
My mistake.
Well, technically, I work in the GMO field, which is relevant to the final chapter.
Oh yeah,
Advanced
supremely.
Biotechnology.
He actually makes specific reference to those the yeasts you were describing to me that one time.
Oh yeah, GMO
for-
yeast for cell production.
Yeah. Yeah, and
That's
Star Trek
actually a massive market now.
Well, there's so much push to replace gasoline with something renewable, whether or not that, like, currently right now the ethanol is not really affordable. But if you could just turn whatever plants and have a yeast digest them into ethanol, then that would be a lot more efficient and cost effective. Which I guess is the whole point.
Well, I mean, combustible fuels, we need to get away from them, right? Because they're a lot.
Well, unless you want to burn something.
Unless you want to burn something. Yeah, well, I'm just saying that, like, they're causing a lot of the problems that we're having with the current environment, as well as they're just not renewable. And not renewable energy just seems silly to me at this point.
Well, it's all non-renewable at the end of the day. It's just what kind of time scale are you talking about?
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem right now would be that these GMO yeast and ethanol production are giving hope to the petroleum industry because they're using them as additives that are claiming to be better, but they're still emitting CO2 and they're still emitting other greenhouse gases, which is a huge problem.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that as both a attempt at a solution, but really a crutch to the problem. And that's kind of, I feel like, something that Harari doesn't really talk about, which is the way history kind of stumbles forward, always trying to solve the last problem.
Right.
I feel like he gives a little too much agency, like, while simultaneously saying that he's not. He totally talks about there being kind of like this inevitability of progress. I don't know if you guys saw that.
I did think it was interesting that he portrays negatives very differently than I would expect. Because he talks a lot about, like, societal genocide of killing all the Tasmanians and like all this stuff, which is very negative, but at the same time, like he doesn't bring up a lot of the negative points of capitalism or the negative points of some of the more modern concepts. And maybe that just has to do with the philosophical arguments that he's making with regards to a more modern human society, versus the more like fact-based element of the first half of the book.
Well, he does talk about that a little bit when he's in the chapter about happiness and how that has changed and altered over the course of history. He makes a point of describing the early industrial era, like the life of someone living and working in that factory type environment, where you get up, you work 12 hours, you go home, maybe you eat, and you go to sleep, and then you repeat. And while that in 150, 200 years will lead to us being able to do this right now in our spare time, for them it was a nightmare, even though it's foundational and important to that industrial economics and then the post-industrial thing. So it's like you're always kind of climbing on the skeleton of people that came before you.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we're starting to see that right now, right? Of like, a lot of it's still baby boomer economics and all that kind of stuff, supporting an aging population. And then in 10 years, that's not going to be the case, because it's going to be more people our age who are wanting to do different things and move things forward in a different way. Even to a certain extent, like the whole idea of what we're talking about with the environment and global warming and all that stuff, like that's a problem that's kind of been handed down to us.
Yeah. Well,
like that we're trying to solve. Stitzel does make a good point, though. Isn't the internet age just as tethered from dawn till dusk?
Yeah, I mean, it can be in a certain way.
Sam, are you got
what?
real... Oh, I don't know. Maybe that was just me. Sorry, you got real quiet there.
I think I was just facing away from the mic.
Okay.
We're tethered, like, maybe more immediately and informationally, but like you're not literally chained to a machine in a factory, unless you are literally chained to a machine in a factory, like in India or China.
Yeah.
But then they're like, those people are just going through what happened here 200 years ago, or
are they
150
though?
years. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty
we're talking about like the China.
I think they're being abused. We did it in terms of progressing our own nation. They're doing it because they're being abused by other nations or other societies trying to gain from them.
Yeah, empires were more about like. I disagree. They're still pulling resources from other places and industrializing within their own countries, which is what industrialization is about. Being able to like have your economy rev faster and faster by just being able to make more stuff.
Some economies do it so that they can prosper themselves. Some are pushed into it in order to be an industry for another economy, not for their own gain.
Yeah, sure, but like
China or India are producing with no consequence to their own economy or their culture or their society.
I disagree that their factories are not helping their own economy.
They're for sure helping them, and that's why the standard of living is changing so much there. In the same way it changed here or in Western Europe. Oh, the police are here, the history police. You've got bad opinions. Sorry, guys. So like the way it changed here or in Western Europe from like, everyone being a subsistence farmer to, and then suddenly you've got this giant like combine harvester that can do the job of 100 people. Where do you go? There's jobs in the city. And that's the similar thing that's happening in Asia right now, and South America to a degree. Like it's not like Brazil.
Those jobs in the city
for instance, during the American Industrial Revolution, were to benefit all the other people in the city who were leaving farmland. The jobs in the city in India are call centers, for instance, benefiting not other people in India or their internal economy.
I missed a big chunk of that. You're wobbling in and out.
Just because it benefits their GDP, it doesn't benefit their internal economy, where the jobs do not help other citizens, right? They help citizens of another nation.
Yeah, well, sometimes, assuming that it's owned, foreign owned, but like you could totally look at the way ownership of 19th century factories as like those people as being essentially foreign to the people who worked in the factories, and if sometimes they wouldn't even speak the same language because they were it was a class stratification rather than like a geographic distance. You know, they were just so far removed from the things they own, they might never even see the factory that they own and 1,000 people work in. So who's being enriched there? You know, there's wealth being extracted and created from different social stratas. I don't know. There's always someone trying to exploit someone else. That is, like, capitalism is trying to curb that into something productive, allegedly.
I can appreciate that argument, but it's also just a strong argument against industrialization. He essentially just argues that it's only going to create stratification.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's something we see, and that's something that, like, more socialist dogmas kind of combat.
But isn't that a big part of capitalism as well, where it's creating stratification in a lot of ways? I mean, the 1% versus the 99% is a huge part of that.
Right, but that's a result, not a cause of.
Isn't it, though, in a certain sense? Where the people who had money reinvested that money and therefore got more money, and it just has caused more and more splintering over time?
And they also intentionally want to create more stratification. They don't try and negate the effects, so they don't care to, obviously.
Well, I think this is more of a seemed like a good idea at the time kind of situation, where they're not intentionally thinking, oh, we're going to amass all of the world's fortunes in my pockets. It's just like, well, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to make some money. And then because it turned out that system of industrialized production is so successful that it just happened to make that change in economic disparity so much more.
Yeah.
Although at the same time, it actually brought people up from the bottom a lot more than like when they had to be subsistence farmers, because they could finally have that opportunity of having just enough extra income to maybe do something else, or, you know, get an education and then gain a little bit more social mobility.
Yeah, I can see an argument for that.
I mean, it's a lot of things. It's like the way industrialization changed society was profound, and it didn't, like, there's nothing that wasn't touched.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
So both sides.
Do you think it actually helped more people break the stratification, though, or do you think it just seems that way because there's a greater population? Overall, I don't know. I would say it's still becoming more and more stratified.
I mean, this is a different type of stratification than we're talking about what happened with the like the untouchables in India, right? Where,
yeah, I'm not talking about a caste system per se. In fact, I'm kind of saying the opposite of that. Is those structures like were pre-existing, and then you introduce the capitalist element where everyone wants money. It's sort of a leveler, and then it kind of creates it shakes things out into a new shape. You know, a new hierarchy.
Yeah. I agree, so I do think that we're in a very big transformative period right now, and I think the way the world's going to be in 10 years is not going to be how it is right now. And I'm not saying necessarily like it'll be so different that we can't see today from here to there, but I just mean like I feel like there's going to be a lot of economic changes and a lot of social changes in the next 10 years. Hopefully for the better, but you never know. Sometimes it takes some worse times to get better times.
Yeah, there's that kind of 120-year cycle that some historians and economists talk about.
But with our rapid advancement, would it be 120 years this time?
Maybe not necessarily. It's more, that number is more to do with generational things.
Right.
Like it's every 3 or 4 generations,
Right.
Regardless of what the political
So if we're
or
talking in generations,
circumstances.
it could actually be longer because the generations live longer.
It could be, yeah. Well, and it would depend on.
It doesn't necessarily have to take 4 generations though anymore. I mean, people are more susceptible to changing or learning new things even within 1 generation.
Well, there's more
of our
technology to influence them, yeah. Influence them more immediately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the example
Well, if you're-
that Harari gave early on in the book of a Russian woman who lived through the October Revolution and saw the different changes in
Yeah.
political structures over the course of her lifetime.
Yeah,
I was
and
going
then
to say,
see it all fall
theoretically,
apart
instead
again.
of 4 generations, what about multiple changes within 1 generation? Which could be possible. We may even see it within our own generation.
Oh,
We've seen
yeah.
a lot of advancement in technology. We've also seen a lot of political stance changes, environmental stance changes.
Even drugs. That sounds like
Yep.
a weird jump, but like I was just thinking, like the way that we look at marijuana compared to how our parents look at marijuana. Maybe not your parents then, but parents in general, right?
Well,
It's
and
a very
then,
different
like,
outlook.
but if you look at it again, like, zoom out and look at how their parents' looked at it, it would have, like, you go almost full circle prior to it being, prior to any of the prohibition of the early 20th century.
Yeah. Well, the Opium Wars, right?
Well, yeah, and that's something that he touches on, the way that was really just driven by economics. It's like, it doesn't matter if it messes people up as long as it makes money, as long as you make bank.
Yeah, there's now many more drugs to look at too, from over-the-counter ones to the ones in our food, genetically modified plants. There's way more things to look at.
I'm loving these ideas I was reading. This sounds like a really strange article to read, but I was really fascinated by it. I was reading a popular science magazine from last year that was actually literally all about agriculture and farming. Like the entire magazine was devoted to it. And
Okay.
one of my favorite articles from that, other than I just want to point out the fact that Sam's grandparents were hippies and smoked tons of weed. One of my favorite articles was about the idea of all of the old factories that are shutting down in like Chicago and that kind of thing are being used to create vertical farms using blue LED lights and growing vegetables in racks so that you can get local produce to the grocery stores at a very reasonable price with very little logistics, so you're not using a lot of preservatives and all that kind of thing, and you're redoing old industrial real estate that isn't being used or has been abandoned to further gentrify the area and make it grow back up again, and yada yada yada, right? Like it's just
you're
a
introducing-
fascinating sort of study in the modern world of farming, where, you know, in 100 years we're probably not going to have farms in the way that we do now, because the cities will continue growing outward, urbanization will continue. Even from where I live in Ottawa, like there used to be farms all up and down my street, like 2 minutes away. A lot of them have been bought and made into housing developments, and that's only going to continue.
Oh yeah, I mean, down the street, like when I grew up in the neighborhood where I am, down the street there used to be a sheep farm. There's like a gas station and a strip mall on top of that farm now. So like just in less than 20 years, that has gone from, you know, rural to fully suburbanized.
Minto's pig farm, confirmed.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, they're not disappearing, they're just condensing. I mean, yeah, individual farms are disappearing, but industrial farms are growing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
The amount of food we're
I'm not sure
producing
that
is more.
all farming is vertical.
Well, I think, and kind of one of the articles that were one of the many pieces in that magazine was suggesting the idea of putting vertical farms in apartment buildings or in giant skyscrapers, right? Where we no longer have to have a giant tract of horizontal land to grow things. We can build a giant skyscraper farm in the middle of the city if we wanted to.
It's not build a new skyscraper. It's take this existing empty skyscraper and put something useful into it.
Yeah, right. But I'm just saying, like, you could build a skyscraper and put a farm in it, and it nowadays, like, you could do that and it wouldn't be a huge leap or anything.
How efficient is that on resources, though?
The blue LED lights are super efficient. The idea was that because you can get uniform lighting consistently, the plants don't have to grow up to strain to get strain to get nutrients, so they can actually grow out. So you get bigger, more leafy produce.
But you have to building, and you need electricity.
Yeah, but LEDs are very power efficient, right?
Well, so the big difference here between regular farming is that normally you don't need extra power. The sun is just there.
Right, but if you think about it, if you're talking about agriculture, like you're talking about, right, but you're talking about like having to have like giant tilling machines and a lot more like gas guzzling things, and then you're gonna have to water large fields, right? Whereas in this sort of vertical farming, it becomes a lot more efficient to do those things.
So it's a lot more compartmentalized and a lot more. I guess you calculate the variables a lot easier that are involved in it, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's a much more controlled environment than just slapping some seeds in the dirt outside and waiting to see what happens.
Yeah. So like the idea being that the yields are more controlled, like being in a greenhouse, right? Where you're less likely to have environmental damage. Your crops are going to be more consistent, and because they're grown in the middle of the city, they don't have to like ship them to another, like they don't have to ship them from Florida, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it produces its own, that kind of intensified farming produces its own problems, as you see with like cows and chickens and stuff, where if you jam that many of one type of organism into a place, all the parasites see that as a feeding frenzy opportunity.
Sure. So
you end up with potential for some sort of plant blight, and then when you have that monoculture.
The question being, though,
whatever.
This is a weird question, and I don't know if we have an answer, but wouldn't that be more controlled inside of a building?
I mean,
they also get a lot more less variability. You'd have more of one strain. And the idea of controlling it within the building would be that you have perfect control over the full sterilization. Like, it would be impossible.
Well, I guess my point being is more that, like, it's not like you're going to get locusts or something inside the building. Unlikely.
You could, though.
Yeah.
You totally could. Yeah. It's not like I don't have a spider living in my bathroom.
Do you have a spider living in your bathroom?
Yes. He eats all the other bugs.
Exactly. That's why you don't kill spiders.
Exactly. But my point is this, like, unless this thing, like Rob said, were perfectly sealed, there's no way that it's as perfectly controlled as you're talking about. Like, right. That just doesn't happen.
I'm just wondering if it's easier to control some of those random factors inside of a building environment that you have more control over. But maybe I'm using the word control way too many times in the sentence.
Well, you're presuming that you can have that much control.
Right. That's fair.
Well, you could, but again, it comes down to the economical cost of it. So how much does it cost to try and gain this control over just sticking with outdoors and planting a bunch of seeds and taking a net % loss on from bugs and from biological problems, but knowing that it did cost you all this extra to erect the building and to power the lighting.
So I think one of the things we're overlooking is that, this may simply be a necessity at a certain point. Like, we get into that Malthusian problem of exponential population growth and only linear food production growth.
Yeah. I think the idea being is that there's, at a certain sense, it's going to make sense to do it that way. Whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing, who knows? But I think at a certain point, that's going to be the only option. Because what other option do we have? Do we eat food paste forever that's artificially manufactured? I mean, that's also an option.
Food-based.
The one thing I will
Okay,
point
so-
out, though, is that farming has already become significantly corporate and industrial.
Yeah.
And I don't think that having them done in factories in the middle of cities changes that. So
No, I mean, it'll change the face of it, but how it operates is not going to be radically different.
no.
So bringing us back up from that weird rabbit hole, that weird tangent that we went on there, I just wanted to look at or talk about one last thing, and then we'll wrap this up.
Sure.
I wanted to talk about his idea at the very end that the world is slowly merging into one single global empire, and that's the real reason why we have less war and less like global strife now than we did before. Do you guys have any thoughts, opinions, feelings?
I agree entirely. And as the older I get, the more I feel in touch with more people. For those who don't know, which most of the people here probably do, I hang out with people from around the world every single day. If Sam was hanging out with me like right before the stream, where we're saying like I was hanging out with my friend from London, and a guy from Italy, and a guy from Scotland, and Sam was in the chat, and our friend Erica was in the chat who lives in New York. Like,
Yeah,
we
it was
were
a
just
global
hanging
party.
out, and we hang out like all the time. You know what I mean? Like on a regular basis. I talk to In like several times a week. I talk to Erica like almost every day, right? Like,
Yeah, it's so easy to talk to people. It's so immediate.
right? And then my little brother just moved to Europe to study pharmacy school in Dublin. Like, I have tons of family in Ireland. I'm feeling more and more like, you know, like I'm North American, not so much Canadian, but North American, though I do tend to separate myself from America right now, currently in the current political climate. But, you know, we're
There's
more...
a difference between the country and the government.
Yeah. So we're more North American now, and I identify with my European culture. And I do business around the world. I'm working with a publisher from Montana. Like,
That's on the world.
yeah. So I agree entirely. I think becoming a global people and eliminating some of these artificial constructs will only benefit us.
Okay, so that was my follow-up question: is good or bad?
I think good, because I think the more that people around the world can work together on singular problems, the easier they will be to solve.
Okay, yeah, I totally get that. I mean, it's the expansion of the network of trust between humans, so we can work together.
Yeah, maybe I'm
Comes
an
back
idealist.
to the start of the book, in which we separate ourselves as Homo sapiens due to our ability to socialize and share information. So it's kind of a nice ending point.
Yeah, where we have to be able to, or our only logical end is to be able to share information with literally everybody.
Yeah, merge into one collective internet consciousness.
Yeah, well, that's the way it's going.
Well, it's like that's how we started. We might as well see it through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I for one welcome our new Google overlords. Yeah, so I guess with that said, we'll wrap up here. Was there any one little thing that you noted and didn't get to talk about yet, just as a single thought?
I am thinking that I need to do some more study on Buddhism, because I feel like some of the lessons that he was talking about in terms of Buddhism would really help my anxiety.
Yeah.
Which is a weird thing to say,
see
but
that.
I think there's some truth to that, of that idea of never being satisfied, and ways to make yourself not feel so terrible about that.
I feel like I'll follow that with I could probably study a little more about all the religions, because I think they might all have a couple tidbits of
Yeah.
things that could benefit my life. I didn't realize the extent of, I don't know, I guess my ignorance towards them.
Okay.
The author covers a large and a broad
I will say that
range of them, but also
world religions class in high school, which was one of the classes I had to take going to a Catholic school, was a very fascinating class. So I took, that was grade 11, I took that, and in grade 12 I took philosophy. So I got 2 regular religions, world religion, and philosophy.
I've taken philosophy, but I was from the public school system, so we didn't have any world religion or any class to teach religion, and I never had interest in it.
Yeah, it was a good class. We talked about Buddhism, we talked about Hinduism a lot, we talked about Islam, we talked about Shintoism and Zoroastrianism, and a few of those other more obscure ones also, which, you know, I think it's good to kind of know where people come from, and a lot of at least the beginning part of the second half, like sort of the end of that third section, was about religion and about how the monotheistic religions like really are combative against each other, and I think understanding the viewpoints is important to a world of like eliminating that us versus them.
Yeah, I thought particularly on that subject that at least from my perspective on these religions, I've seen more academically and not as much in a like day-to-day perspective, but it's more like the similarities between them than the differences. They're so nearly identical in 99% of aspects.
Yeah, but it's that 1% that they'll fight a war over.
People will scour the earth and salt it for this one like difference in wording.
Yeah. So yeah.
So yeah, overall, I certainly thought this was a very interesting book, and I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it. And I actually have already recommended it.
I was thinking of recommending it to a few people as well that I think would benefit from some of the ideas. Not necessarily saying like, hey, this will change your worldview or anything like that, but saying, hey, this might make you think about some things a little bit, and maybe that's a good thing. So.
Oh, and I had a thing I wanted to post in chat that I completely forgot about. I found this really interesting little animation of like the history of the entire history of the world and like the spread of humanity, a time-lapse map.
Oh, cool.
Come here. I'm gonna post it in chat here. It's like 20 minutes long, so it's not something you'll be able to look at right now. But
next time. Yeah.
Well, it reflects. It's a really good companion to what this book is about, or the way humans spread out over the world, and then you can see the empires form and break down and kind of move around like weird civilization amoebas.
Yeah, I'm gonna add that to my watch later list.
So having posted that, Rob, I didn't hear what your final opinion was.
I think the book did a good job of transitioning from scientific views to kind of psychological and sociological views, and I think it's a good stepping stone to lead to the author's next book, which really does look forward at what humanity might lead to, which is an interesting question, and definitely there's a lot of people with a lot of different views on it, so it's always good to see a different one.
Yeah, and he certainly, I thought, had a mainstream opinion, but then like just a little bit enough of his own angle and cynicism on things that it added a lot of flavor.
Yeah, for sure. I like the way he presented arguments as well. I felt like he did a good job of really presenting his argument and giving a concrete, if not necessarily a factual example, at least a logical historical example devised by him to prove or to at least illustrate a point.
He showed his work very well.
Yeah, which I really liked, and I liked I know we didn't get too much into it, but I really liked the sort of citations where he listed lots of different types of articles on stuff. That sort of end section there.
Yeah, and there's like a huge endnotes thing if you do want to follow up on any of these things and take a deeper dive. So it's academically, pretty sound as well.
Yeah.
And that's where the author really doesn't try to push his own opinions on you. It gives you the background information to go see where he came up with his ideas or his principles.
Yep, there's a page Brendan was showing us 30 seconds ago as I watched the stream. I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, right, yeah. So I guess just before we wrap up this episode, we can give recommendations for anything else, like not this book related. If there's anything that's popped up, work that or other projects we'd recommend that do not involve us. So I know I've been playing a lot of Agents of Mayhem recently. It's a really good game. Volition has not, the developers of that game have in fact not done super well and had to lay off a bunch of people recently, so that sucks for them.
I heard some interesting ideas about that article because I saw that article as well, where
oh, I don't know. I'm sure there was an article. I was following Chip Cheesem. He got canned.
Oh,
Sucks.
did he?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he was one of the. Well, it was 20 people I think out of 300, so it's like a significant cut. But either way, you should try that game out.
Yeah,
it's pretty good.
It's fantastic.
I don't know if you guys had anything current.
I like how you specified stuff you're not involved in, just to spite me.
Well, that you can pitch that, but like that's what this segment is supposed to be, man. It's other people's stuff.
I will do an other people's stuff as well. Okay. So I just wanted to point out that these came out yesterday. These are you can't really see it down there, but there I am, right there. Boom. It's a comic book I wrote, and these just came out, and I'm really excited about them because it's kind of like the first published work that I'm in. So I'm really excited about that. But my recommendation right now is actually the Lethal Weapon series, the new one that came out starring Damon Wayans and Clyde something rather, I forget that guy's name, and Jordana Brewster is one of the main characters. It's actually a really fascinating psychological show that's mixed with like ridiculous police action. Like it's all like cars exploding and like I don't think there's been an episode where an explosion didn't happen yet, and I'm like 7 or 8 episodes in. So it's completely over the top, completely unrealistic police work mixed with like this really interesting psychological study of depression, suicidal nature, post-traumatic stress disorder, like really fascinating. So that's kind of my recommendation if you're looking for something that's like a little bit intellectual but a little bit fun at the same time, like you want some cool explosions and some gunfire. It's the way to go. Oh, and Blade Runner comes out next week.
All right, I'm gonna recommend another book that my friend contributed to. It's called In the Trenches, and it's about a general practicing doctor trying to juggle their life and their work.
That sounds really cool, actually. What was it called? It's called In the Trenches?
In the Trenches. I can't remember who the primary author is, unfortunately, but my friend is medical doctor Emily Dewhurst, and she's on the cover as well.
Cool.
Her name is listed.
Yeah. I'll throw that on like a Goodreads list. See if what other people have to say about that too. So I think on that note, we are going to say goodnight on this slightly shorter episode, but not really. Actually,
yeah,
we're
almost extended past the hour that you wanted there, Sam.
Yeah, well, you know what? That's fine, because now we're exactly at 90 minutes. That's what it all worked out, man. It's like setting your alarm 30 minutes earlier than you really want to get up and then sleeping in 30 minutes. It feels like you stole time.
Thank you for having me on twice.
Yeah, and
Mr. Case, have a good night.
Thanks for joining us, Rob.
Thanks a lot, Rob. And Kat.
And Kat.
Which is going for my headphone cable. All right.
The
All right,
chat
everybody.
suggests you name him Yuval.
Yeah.
And put them on so they can see this crazy cat.
What?
The chat can't see it, but there's a very low frame rate cat.
Yeah.
All right, on the low frame rate cat, I'm gonna say goodnight. Everybody.
All right.
Right. No, I forgot the next stream and the next
Yes.
book before we go. That's
Yeah,
the important
right.
thing.
Important.
I have this sticky note that says next episode, and then all the information about it right here. So I
That's
can't
the
not
wrong
see
date.
it. Oh, did we move that one up?
Did we move it up or move it back? We moved it back.
So it's not the 21st. It would be or the 23rd.
It's the 30th.
Right. That's what I meant.
Because I'm in
Okay.
LA on the 23rd, so like
Right.
I can't be there. And Erica is
Okay,
also in
well-
LA on the 23rd, so she can't be there either. So
You know, I'm pretty sure I actually changed it in my Google Calendar. Anyway,
yeah.
suffice to say, 30th of October. For anyone who's interested, is going to be our next episode. We're going to be reading the first third of Moby Dick
Yeah.
with the one, the only Erica Cotton.
She does have a pet. She has a dog named Luna. It will be doing tricks in the background. Don't you worry.
Yeah, or just like sulking.
Yeah, it'll be doing.
Depends.
She'll be doing something. I'm not getting a spray tan. That is absolutely not happening. I refuse.
How are you going to fit in LA without a spray tan?
I'm not trying to fit in LA.
Well, I don't. How are you going to become a huge, like, movie star? I mean, you're trying to be an actor, right? That's why you're going to LA.
I am so not trying to become an actor.
Well, on the bombshell that Brennan isn't trying to become an actor, he's trying to become a director.
Yes, I
I
will take
think
it.
we'll close the stream out here.
Thanks for joining us. Rob's already peaced. Like he's gone.
Rob's gone. And
No,
back
I managed
again.
to-
Oh, he made it back.
Good luck becoming an actor / director.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep. As you seek fame, we'll still be here on the internet.
The next book is Moby Dick.
Yeah, next book is Moby Dick, and that'll take us out to the end of the year because it's a huge book. We're going to do 3 episodes, and it's going to be great.
Yeah, hopefully.
All right. Peace.
Yep.
Peace out,
See you later, guys.
Have a good one.
And now we wait the 30 seconds for stream.